Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this morning's Beef Brunch Educational Series webinar. My name is Jason Holmes. I'm a livestock specialist in the Northeast region with the LSU Ag Center. I'll be hosting and presenting today with the help of Dr. Ashley Edwards. Dr. Edwards is an extension agent and coordinator of animal science programs in North Louisiana for the LSU Ag Center. Today, we'll be discussing some of the benefits and ways you can implement estrus synchronization in your herds when you are breeding by natural service. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. We will be muting your microphones. We ask that you please keep them muted throughout the webinar. If you are joining us online via the Teams app or link, please enter your question into the Q&A box at any time during the presentation. If you're calling in, you may text your question to Dr. Edwards at 512-818-5476. Again, if you're calling in, you can text your questions throughout the webinar to Dr. Edwards. That number is 512-818-5476. In the interest of time, we will wait to answer all questions at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to get us started this morning. I'll cover the first few slides, and then Dr. Edwards will jump in. So again, we will be talking about estrus synchronization. A lot of times, folks think that technology or practice is just if we're going to be artificial inseminating the cow herd. But today we're going to be looking at this as a tool to use with the existing bull battery that we have or natural service. So how important is reproduction in a beef herd? So most of what I'm going to be discussing is going to be the economic side of why we consider a reproduction a very economically important aspect whenever we talk about beef production. So as we talk about profitability, let's talk about reproductive, production, and product traits. So we know that reproductive traits are lowly heritable compared with production and product traits. So let's just quickly talk about what we're talking about each one of those. So reproductive traits, so in terms of how quickly within the first 20 to 40 days does a cow return to estrus after calving, or does she calve early in the calving season year after year? So those are what we're talking about in terms of some of those reproductive traits. Production traits, we're talking about birth weights, weaning weights, yearling weights. That's what we're talking about in terms of production traits. And then product traits, so we're talking about carcass, merit, carcass quality. So we know that through genetics we can greatly improve those carcass traits. So we know that those are highly heritable. So if you see the chart there, about 30% heritability whenever we're talking about those high quality carcass traits, all the way down to about 10% whenever we're talking about reproduction. However, if you look at the economic importance relative to reproduction, those traits are 10 times more relative to economic importance. So why is that? So think about if you don't get a calf, if she does not produce you a calf every year, then you have to consider what you're losing from that female. So that's why when it comes down to economic importance, we can do a lot in terms of improving carcass traits, but if we don't ever get a calf, then that's how that really becomes very detrimental to our profitability. So let's look at the cost of infertility. So this might be a little bit older data from USDA and Purina Mills, but I think it's very applicable to today. That dollars and cents may fluctuate a little bit, but I think the gist of it is we do realize that we do have cost per year in terms of reproductive problems on a national scale. So about say $15 per cow per year in reproductive costs that are passed down to the beef consumer, the beef producer each year. So those are female infertility, calving difficulties, abortions, and stillbirths. So if you look at this chart over on the right-hand side of this slide, so if we assume an annual production cost anywhere between $500 and $900, so in the state of Louisiana, I would think that would be somewhere $500 or less in a very efficient herd. So in a lesser efficient herd, we could be jumping up there $600 to $700 in annual production costs per cow per year. So if we just across the board assume that if we do not get a calf from that cow in that given production cycle, that we could lose about $200 in profit. So I would argue that may be closer to $300 in lost profits. But we'll just assume, for argument's sake today, we'll just assume about $200 in lost profits. So if we go back up there and we'll just follow that first line. So if we assuming $500 in annual cow cost per year, we lose $200 in profit. So an annual economic loss per cow per year, based on those two assumptions, about $700 per cow per year. So if we have 4% of the cows that do not calve in that production cycle, we're looking at about $2,800. If we have 10% of those cows that do not calve in a production cycle, about $7,000. So you can see what infertility does for us whenever we do not have the majority, 87, 90% of those cows calving in each production cycle. So what is reproductive efficiency? So we're talking about a high pregnancy rate. If every cow, and this is just a question I'm going to pose to you, if every cow calves over a 12-month period, is your herd physically efficient? So I hope that the resounding answer to that question is no, you are not physically efficient if every cow calves over a 12-month period. So what are we talking about? So we're trying to optimize reproductive efficiency by shifting the calving distribution. And we'll look at a calving distribution in just a second. But this is done by either shortening your breeding calving season or by moving your breeding season up earlier in the year a little every year. So I think one of the biggest challenges whenever we talk to folks about tightening up the breeding and calving season is that if we do that through moving the breeding season up earlier in the year a little every year, that is a huge challenge to producers, because we know that we're going to lose some. We're going to have cows that probably are not going to get. We're not going to get a calf in that particular season, and it gets frustrating for folks whenever the name of the game is to get a calf on the ground and weaned and put on a trailer. Whenever we don't get that done, it gets very frustrating. And I think that's where Estrus Sync can play a major role in tightening up that breeding and calving season without some of those frustrations of just trying to do it naturally with your breeding season. So what can we do to improve reproductive success in our herd? So the first thing we got to do is try to control what we can. And here's what we're talking about in terms of controlling the breeding and calving season. So this chart, the green line represents an optimum calving distribution. The red line represents what we might say as a normal calving distribution. So we're trying to get the majority of the cow herd to calve in the first, ideally in the first 65 days of the calving season. So if we want them to calve in the first 65 days, we have to get them bred earlier in the calving season, and that's where estrus synchronization is going to come into play. So why do we want that? So number one, increase calf crop, improve fertility. But I think in the cow-calf setting, where the name of the game is putting pounds on a trailer, heavier calves at weaning. So stop and think about that. So if we get more calves born in the early part of the calving season, automatically our weaning weights are going to go up. So our average weaning weight is going to go up, and that's what we're trying to do. So increase uniformity of the calf crop. So instead of having some calves that are weighing 600 pounds all the way down to some calves that are weighing 350 to 400 pounds, we have more calves weighing in that 500 to 600 pounds. So we only have a 100-pound weight break, which makes it much easier and more efficient for us to market those calves of that calf crop, and gives us more options with that. So improved efficiency of labor and management. So again, instead of us spreading out our labor over 100 days, 120 days, we're concentrating that labor down to 65 to 85 days. So it just makes us better managers of our labor whenever we can tighten up that calving season. And then better assessment and control of nutrition and health. And anybody that's ever heard me talk, they know that I love talking about beef cattle nutrition. So it just makes us a whole lot better managers of the nutrition of that calf crop and managing that as we go forward through the while we've got them on our place. So economic importance of calving distribution, and I'll move through these two charts real quick. I encourage you to study on these and look at them. So this first chart is the typical calving distribution using natural service in a 90-day season. So percent calving first 21 days all the way down to 83 plus days, so 35 to 10%. So we've got a distribution there of age at weaning all the way from 250 days to 160 days. Well, we know that those calves that are born earlier in the calving season are going to give us a higher average daily gain of about 2.2 pounds, and then we'll just move down through the rest of those, and we'll figure about 2 pounds. So you can see the total pounds weaned, ranging from a little over 19,000 pounds all the way down to those lighter weight calves of about 3,000 pounds in that particular distribution. So that gives us a total pounds of about 47,000, average calf weight of about 500 pounds. So based on $135 a hundredweight on that particular class of cattle, we're looking at about $63,000 in gross revenue based on that calf crop. So a couple of those assumptions down there, I think it's important to note. So we're assuming an 87% calf crop. We're assuming about 85 pounds at birth. So we're in this particular scenario, our first calf would be born around November the 1st. The last calf would be born around January 30th. And we're going to wean everything on a particular date. So let's say July the 8th. We're gonna wean everything on that date. So we're not going to wean as calves get big enough to let's say that we're trying to wean a 600-pound calf. We're not going to wait on those. We're going to wean everything on a set date, and that's I think that's important to note in this particular scenario. So let's look at the next chart, ideal calving distribution using Estrus Sync and natural bull service. So this is what we're talking about today, and this is what Dr. Edwards is going to be talking about the technicals. We're using Estrus Sync, but we're still using the existing bull battery that we have in the 90-day season. So we're going to try to get the calving distribution where we've got everything calving in the first 65 days, or in this one, the first 63 days. So first 21 days, about 70%. The next estrus cycle, so day 22 to 42, about 20%. And then of the third estrus cycle, about 42 to 63 days. So we know that that cow will be in heat typically every 21 days. So that's where those day distributions are coming from. So if we move out across there quickly, so we know that our average calf weight, 635 pounds, all the way down to about 465 pounds. So we moved our average calf weight at a little over 500 pounds, about 508 pounds. We've moved that up to 542 pounds. So we're going to market about 51,845 pounds based on $135 a hundredweight. We just increased our profit there, our gross revenue, to a little over $70,000. So $70,000 here, $63,834 based on our previous scenario. So about $6,190 in added gross revenue due to the increase of marketable pounds. So let's just say, and Dr. Edwards is going to go through several protocols with you. So let's just say we use a one shot of prostaglandin to get everybody cycling close to the same time period. That would cost you about $3 a head. So if we spent $300 on a 100 head cow herd, we're still looking at about $5,890 in added value just based on that single protocol. So we know that we can be a little bit more efficient in terms of how many pounds or what's the poundage that we can get available to us to market if we can just get more of the calves calving early in the calving season. And I think that's why it's important to realize that we can improve economic efficiency by doing that. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Edwards, and she will finish up the presentation for us today.
All right, thank you, Jason. So yeah, I'm going to kind of go into how you can implement these estrus synchronization protocols. And I think it's kind of important to start with the fact that, we can look at estrus synchronization and we can look at a lot of these other reproductive technologies that are listed on the left-hand side of this table here. And I think Jason, myself, and a lot of our colleagues can sit here and just probably take 2 hours, 3 hours on each one of these technologies and tell you why it's important for the herd. But as you look at estrus synchronization that we're talking about today, and even as you go further down through even pregnancy determination for palpation and some of these others, you can see that on all operations, this is a survey across the nation, there's less than 20% of producers utilizing any given one of these technologies. And as we focus on estrus synchronization in particular, less than 8% of all operations are using this. And so Jason just sat there and he just told you that, you can gain thousands of dollars on a 100 head herd. Smaller than that, you can still gain hundreds to thousands of dollars in profit by using this technology. But why? Why is it that less than 8% of people can do that or are willing to do that? And so the survey went a little bit further and asked people, why are you not using these technologies? Do you think that it doesn't work? Is it a labor time issue, cost? What do you look at for your facilities? Do those work? Or do you just think it's too hard, too complicated overall? And as we assess those general reasons for not using estrus synchronization, of course, the number one thing that people cited was that it was too labor or too time intensive. And at the beginning of this presentation, Jason told you, well, this is how you can be more efficient in your time and in your labor. And so one thing that we wanted to do today was just kind of point out, yes, it might take a little bit more work maybe up front, but you are being more efficient with your time in that given day that you are giving that injection, or your calves are calving over a shorter period of time, and you know when to expect those calves to hit the ground. So you are able to be more efficient with your time and more efficient with your labor if you know calves are going to hit the ground within a 30 to 60 day period, instead of I'm going out and I'm checking my cows every day and You know, one of my cows might calve today. I really don't know because my bull is out there all year long. And so that's the perspective that we're trying to drive home with the labor and time efficiency. Is you are concentrating your labor and you're concentrating your time into, or you're concentrating your labor into a shorter period of time, excuse me. And so there's different ways to go about that, and I'll show you the different protocols, because these are not going to be a one size fits all protocol. You have to look at what you have available to you and what works for your individual operation. And so as we come into the second and third reasons, cost and the fact that it's too difficult or too complicated, or what producers cited for their reasons of not using this. And Jason's already kind of driven the point of the cost makes up for itself. If you can get those calves born earlier in the calving season, they're heavier at weaning, and this can pay for itself if it's done correctly. And the too difficult, too complicated portion of that, I think that's kind of on us doing what we're doing today and educating producers and explaining that it does not have to be complicated. Personally, I'm kind of surprised that lack of facilities was not cited a little bit higher, because to me, I think that's probably our biggest limiting factor with a lot of producers is the facilities and the capability to bring your heifers or your cows up and administer these injections or insert a seeder or these things that I'm about to start talking about. So the advantages, Jason's already kind of gone over these, but I want to touch on a few more. So he's talked about tightening your breeding and calving season, getting them bred earlier so that they're heavier at weaning. But if you come down to that third and that fourth bullet point, so postpartum recovery is that time after calving that it takes the uterus to be able to repair itself and sustain a pregnancy all over again. And we have to have that postpartum interval shorter than 80 days. So what this does is if she calves earlier in the calving season, then she has more time to recover before the next breeding season starts. And so that's where we're allowing that to come in. If she breeds earlier in her first breeding season or second breeding season, then that's going to keep following each year. Your cows that breed later and calve later in those seasons, they basically, the way Dr. Glenn Gentry explains it in the Master Cattleman program is it's almost like a conveyor belt that the later that they breed, the later they calve, it just keeps getting pushed back later and later each year until she eventually falls off that conveyor belt and you end up culling her. So you want them earlier in the breeding season, earlier in the calving season, not only for those economic benefits of having the heavier calves, but also the recovery that you're going to get on those females so that they can, again, breed early and calve early, and you can keep that cycle going, and they're at the front end of that conveyor belt, and they're not getting pushed off, and they're not getting culled. The other point that I want to drive in is that fourth bullet point on the left-hand side of your screen, the inducing the estrus cycles in anestrus cows and prepubertal heifers. So you have to use a progesterone or a progestin to do this, but if we have some heifers that are they're kind of on that brink of puberty, or they're coming into puberty, but maybe that communication between the reproductive tract and the brain's not there, and their heat cycles aren't quite as strong, and those sorts of things, using some of these hormones, using the progesterone, can help induce these estrus cycles. Same thing if we're looking at that postpartum recovery for some of our cows, we can start seeing heats and get them into stronger heats, or excuse me, more regular heats, I guess would be the more appropriate way to say that, by using a progesterone. Now, when we look at the disadvantages, we've talked those on that table, the cost, the labor, your facilities. The more intensive management, producers list this as a disadvantage, but to me, honestly, I need to shift this over to an advantage, because I think that, I'll take that back. I know that if you're using these protocols, you are more likely to be keeping better records. you're more likely to see problems in your herd. You're more likely to see which cows are not giving you a calf every year, which ones are maybe subfertile or have lower performing calves. Any of your problems that might be happening that you're just not seeing, those kind of come to light because you're sitting there and you're pulling your cows up or your heifers up and you're looking at them and you're writing down what you're giving. And you're just more aware when you start to increase the intensity in which you manage your herd. So really, I think that requiring more intensive management, I think that becomes an advantage rather than a disadvantage. So let's talk about these hormones. There's 3 different classes essentially that you can use. So there's your prostaglandins. Jason mentioned that earlier as a one-shot protocol that I'm going to show you here in a moment, but that is like Lutalized or Estrumate. You're looking at $2.50 or $3 a dose. And there are protocols that only require 1 shot or maybe 2 shots of that. Your progesterone that I was just talking about, if you were going to be synchronizing heifers, you want to use a progesterone. And the CEDAR, the controlled internal drug release, this is the device that you're seeing on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. It's an intravaginal device. You need to use a progesterone if you're going to be synchronizing your heifers. That just has to do with that communication between the brain and the reproductive tract that I was talking about earlier. It's just not, that communication is not quite as strong, basically. And so for you to really see the benefits of using estrus synchronization in heifers, you need to use one of these progesterone protocols. And those get to be a little bit more expensive. You're looking about $12.50 to $13 per CEDAR that you purchase. But they're very easy to put in and they're very easy to remove. They need to stay in for about a week, that you'll see here on the protocols in a moment. And then your GnRH, so GnRH is gonadotropin releasing hormone, and that's a hormone that comes from the brain that stimulates the release of some other hormones in the brain that talk to the reproductive tract, to try to put it simply without getting real heavy into how the hormones work and endocrinology. But if you've heard of any of your timed artificial insemination protocols, GnRH is used in those. So what GnRH does is when you use it in conjunction with a prostaglandin or a progesterone, or I guess I should say in conjunction with both of those, it gives you a tighter synchrony. So more cows will come into heat within a shorter period of time, within about, a day or 2 of each other, versus it being spread out over a 5-day period. So you just get a tighter synchrony there with that. And so I'm going to elaborate on that more as we go through each of these protocols. But I realize that if you Google estrus synchronization, this is probably what you're going to see. So this is actually, it's a 2-page document. I have the pages next to each other. And this is from the Beef Reproduction Task Force. And they've gone through and looked at tons of data and have shown that these are for sure proven estrus synchronization protocols. These are for artificial insemination, okay? So these work really well. You can use these, and I'm going to be showing you these essentially for natural service. But what I want to point out is when you start looking at this, it can be a little overwhelming. And if we're talking about using your bull battery, using natural service, it really does not have to be as complicated. So I don't want you to get overwhelmed if you go onto Google and you look this up and you think, I just want to get those numbers that Jason was telling me about. I just want to be able to get my calves born a little earlier, have them a little bit heavier, but it looks confusing. So let me walk you through some of the simplest protocols that we can utilize. And again, I'm going to emphasize the fact that these are not one size fits all. So if you've not used estrus synchronization and you are interested in it, please reach out to me, reach out to Jason, any of your local extension agents, and we will help you work through what protocol will work best for your operation. So the simplest way to go, and this is talking mature cows, is that 1 shot of prostaglandin that Jason and I have both mentioned. So this is your Lutalized or your Estrumate. Assuming we have open cows, okay, so the bull's not been with them, your vets determine that they are for sure open. You bring everybody up. You give them a shot of prostaglandin. Again, that's $2.50 to $3. You turn them out with the bull. Most of them will come into heat within about 48 hours, so about 2 days. But what's typically seen is about 70% of those cows are going to show signs of estrus or signs of heat within 1 to 5 days. Okay, so all I did was I brought all my cows up. I knew they were all open. I gave them this shot. I turned them out, and 70% of them are going to show heat within 1 to 5 days. Now, I do also want to point out that your bull to cow ratio when you use estrus synchronization is still going to be the same as what it would be if you were not. So you use the number of cows equivalent to the bull's age in months. So if we're talking a 2-year-old bull, you've got about 24 cows out there with him. So you can still do that. Realize that not every single cow that comes into heat is going to get bred, but what will happen is in 21 days when their cycle comes back again, if they were not bred, they're back into heat the same time together. So we've synchronized their cycles, we've synchronized their heats. So you're still seeing the majority of those cows getting bred, you know, maybe that day 42 versus that day 21 or whatever it is. You can expand on that, and you can do 2 shots of prostaglandin. So we give that 1 shot, bull is turned out with them, majority 70%, maybe 80% will come into heat within 5 days. If they were not mounted, okay, so if he did not mount them, if they were not bred, or if they were not serviced, excuse me, anybody that was not serviced gets brought back up on day 11 and given another shot of prostaglandin. So the cows responding to this prostaglandin is based off of where they're at in their estrus cycle. They're not all going to be in the same spot. So you're going to have 25 to 30% of your cows that don't respond to that first shot of prostaglandin. So if the bull did not mount them, if he did not service them, day 11, they come back through the chute, you give that second shot of prostaglandin, and then of those that receive that shot, those 70 to 80% of those should come into heat within 5 days. It might be more than 80%. They all should pretty much respond there, provided that they're in good condition. So your 1 shot of prostaglandin, your 2 shot of prostaglandin, very, very simple. I do point out it is important if the bull mounted her, if it's possible that she was bred, if he did service her, do not give that second shot of prostaglandin, because it can cause abortions. Okay, so prostaglandins can cause abortions and in your bred cows, and you do not want to give that to anybody that might be bred. If you bring that progesterone into it, okay, so this is a CEDAR, again, that controlled internal drug release, that intravaginal device that I mentioned earlier. You bring all of your open cows and your heifers, this is good for heifers. You bring them up, you place the CEDAR in them, it stays in for 7 days, and you pull it out. And so this is about $12.50 to $13 per head. Very simple, just having the CEDAR in there. You're going to see the same effects where about 70% of them will come into heat within 1 to 5 days. So again, this particular protocol is good for heifers and for cows. But what I like to do is if you're going to use a progesterone, so if we're talking our heifers or even our cows and you want to use the CEDAR, my recommendation is to use both these, the CEDAR, the progesterone, as well as that prostaglandin, so that estrumate or that lutalize. So bring the females up, place the CEDAR in, leave it in for a week. When you take it out, when you remove it, you give a shot of prostaglandin. And you'll see here, I still have noted that 70% or so will come into heat within 1 to 5 days. But what you will see is that more of them will come into heat at a 48-hour window. So you get a tighter synchrony there. So probably 50% or so will be in heat that 48-hour mark after giving that prostaglandin, and the other 20% or so will kind of be spread over that 5 days. So that's where giving the prostaglandin comes in, given that extra $3 or whatever it's going to take. It gives you a tighter synchrony. More of them are going to come into heat right about 48 hours later, and then a few of them are going to trickle in over the next few days. So this is great for your heifers. If you're going to be synchronizing heifers, this is probably the protocol that I would recommend. Another thing to know too is that CEDAR can stay in longer than 7 days. So if you're one of our producers that you maybe does not raise cattle for the primary source of income, and something comes up and you need to push back to the following weekend when you're working your cows, that's fine. It can stay in. Even for my guys that do raise cattle as their primary source of income, things happen, things come up. Your CEDAR can stay in for 2 weeks, and it's not going to really hurt those animals at all. So there's some leeway there, but it needs to stay in for at least really 7 days for you to see a good effect coming from that. And then I mentioned earlier the timed artificial insemination protocols and using this GnRH hormone. With that, this gives you an even tighter synchrony than what the CEDAR and the prostaglandin would do. So you'll see the vast majority of them come in really at that, I keep saying that 48-hour mark, but that's what prostaglandin does. When you give that last shot of prostaglandin, on average, the vast majority come in 48 hours later. So this GnRH at the very beginning, it basically resets their cycle for them. It kind of reinforces putting that CEDAR in, and again, just gives you a tighter synchrony overall. So it's going to be 100% what your operation is, what you can afford to do, what you want to try, and what you want to spend. So these are some names of some different protocols, but essentially the take home from this is it can be as simple as, the 2-shot prostaglandin or even the 1-shot prostaglandin coming in at $3 a head, to coming in and doing some of these timed artificial inseminations and pushing $30 a head. That bottom protocol that you see down there, that is for purebred Brahmins, a timed artificial insemination protocol for them. So if we're talking natural service, and you want to get a really, really tight synchrony and you're looking at your purebred Brahmin, you end up giving an extra shot of prostaglandin and an extra shot of GnRH for those. So I encourage you, again, if you're wanting to use these, reach out to us so that we can look at your operation, look at what you have, and recommend a protocol that's going to work better for you and your cows. And then what else? I mean, you call us and you say, I want to do this, and these are, I think this protocol here would work. What do you think? Well, I'm going to come out and I'm going to sit down with you and we're going to look at your herd, and I'm going to ask you some of these questions. So were they already cycling? Particularly my heifers, are they at that age that they, and weight that they should be coming into puberty? Have they already hit puberty? If we're talking the mature cows, do they show signs of heat every 21 days? Are they exhibiting those regular estrus cycles? Of course, your animals have to be free of disease. They have to be of a good body condition score and on a good nutritional program. That's one point that I like to drive home, is just because you've got a good body condition score doesn't mean that you might not necessarily be missing some nutrients in their diet. So sometimes there's some things there that you just don't see when you look at the cows. So we would look at your animals, we would look at your health program, look at your nutrition program, and make sure that everything is pretty ideal before we start spending the money on these estrus synchronization protocols. And you have to be willing to learn and to implement this. So come into it with an open mind. Make sure you have the working facilities and the labor and the help that's going to be needed. Whether we're just talking bringing them up to give them that 1 shot, or if you're going to have to bring them up twice with the CEDAR or whatever it might be, do you have the help and the facilities to be able to do that? Even with the bull, you need to know for sure that those cows are coming into heat, because you need to know that these protocols are working. So I recommend, as we look at number 6 here, the accurate and thorough detection of estrus. Are you using Estrotech patches? So patches that go on the tail head. Are you using a chin ball marker? Are you using some sort of device that can tell you that that bull mounted that cow and he serviced her properly, hopefully, but you know that she came into a good standing heat, and you know that these protocols are working? Because if you are just going out and you're giving these injections and you're doing everything that the protocol says, but you're not monitoring those cows to see if they can actually come into heat, then you have no idea if the labor, if the time, if the money that you put into this is worth it, because you don't know really for sure if she's been bred based off of the synchronization protocol. And so going in with that is a good ID system and good record. So I mentioned that earlier. It does bring you to increase the intensity of your management overall, particularly your records. And so it's good to me. It's good to me. That's not a disadvantage at all, that you're actually going out there and increasing the records that you are keeping because you've implemented these protocols. And then having the right attitude kind of goes in with that. So a few things before I really wrap up. Summary, you've got to think about the facilities you have, the labor you have, the time that you have. These protocols can be extremely, extremely simple. They can increase your profit per cow, tremendously, even after the cost of the protocols. You've got to think about your ability to do this, your willingness to do this. You've got to think about, are we talking heifers or are we talking cows? Because that does kind of dictate which protocol you're going to use, particularly if you're using heifers and needing to do that progesterone. And you've got to look at your herd as a whole. Is everybody in good condition? Are they healthy? Because that will play a tremendous role in whether these are going to work or not. The other thing that I don't have a slide on in here, but I want to point out is for our guys that are doing a continuous exposure to a bull. So your bull stays out 365 days out of the year. Like Jason mentioned earlier, that's probably not fiscally efficient. So we want to tighten up that breeding season, but you don't know how. You don't know how to do that. Well, these protocols that I just showed you can help you with that. It can help ease that burden just a little bit, and it can decrease the amount of time that it would take for you to be able to get to a 60 to 90 day breeding season. And so I really encourage you that if you are one of our guys that keeps the bull out year round, that's something, I always mention this, but it's something growing up that my grandpa did. We had the bull out year round, and if my mama spent too much money, we sold the biggest calf, and Papa went to the bank with that check. But it really does pay in the long run. That check's going to be a lot bigger if you've tightened up your breeding season. And estrus synchronization is a fantastic tool and a fantastic way to do that. So I really, really encourage you to reach out to us. Let us come sit down with you and let us talk to you about the best way and the easiest way to do that. And you'll be able to see your increased weaning weights and your increased profits overall. So with that, I hope that you realize that it's not that complicated. It can be worth it in terms of your profits in the long run. I hope we've kind of debunked some myths that it's scary, that it's hard, that it's crazy expensive, because it's not. It does not have to be expensive. It is not complicated. And it's not one size fits all. And so we can take these protocols that I've shown you today, we can work with those, we can amend those just a little bit and find something that's going to work for you. So Jason, that's all I have for them in terms of the PowerPoint. Do we have any questions in the Q&A box?
No, ma'am, we do not. If we get a few, I'll just make one quick comment talking about economics. So whenever you were talking about the importance of effective estrus detection, right along the lines of economics, and we're not trying to nickel and dime anybody, but that's only going to add about another $1 to $1.25 to your cow cost by using an Estrotech patch or Kmart patch or something along those lines. So I know that you mentioned that back on your 2-shot prostaglandin protocol, you've got to have some sort of estrus detection out there, because you don't want to be giving that to a cow that has been effectively serviced. So, and that's only going to add, like I said, about another $1 to your protocol. But at this time, Dr. Edwards, we don't have any questions in the Q&A box.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for adding that. Yes, I failed to mention that part. It's not expensive, and on the other protocols as well, not just on that 2-shot, but any protocol that you use, you want to know that these are working. You want to know that your cows are coming into heat, your heifers are coming into heat, and it gives you bred dates, so you can see and know when to expect them to calve. And so you want to replace those each estrus cycle, make sure that she is bred, the bull doesn't mount her again, that she took that first time, and those sorts of things. And so it's very inexpensive, excuse me, and efficient. It is very efficient to utilize those. So as we wrap up, if you have questions, you can text those to me. You can put them in the Q&A box. But I do ask that you please take a couple of minutes. I don't think this survey takes more than 3 minutes to go in and evaluate our webinar. So this allows us to know, should we continue these? If you have topics that you want us to present on, there's a section that you can add those in there. But doing these surveys really helps with our programming efforts and knowing what it is that we can do to better serve you. So if you're joining us live, you can view this little box here, the Q&R code in your camera. So open up the camera on your phone, view this little crazy square on the right, and you're going to see a little banner up at the top of your phone. You can click on that, and it will take you directly to our survey that you can do on the phone. If you're watching the recorded version of this, I will have a link in the video description or in the podcast description for this recording, so you can still go back and do that survey for us, even if you're not watching this with us live. Jason, are we still no questions?
No, ma'am.
All right, thank you all so much for being with us today. Thank you, Jason, for joining me in this, and we will be back with you next month.